Hello and welcome back, and in today's video I'm going to answer, hopefully, one simple question. Why would you buy the DS923 Plus instead of the 1522 Plus, or vice versa? Because these two devices, despite there being about 3 to 4 months release difference between them, depending where you are in the world, and despite being remarkably similar in their hardware architecture, there's only about 100 nicker or so difference between them. Depending on, again, where you are in the world, your currency of choice and your local tax, you are looking at about 100 to about 130, maybe 140 quid at the very top end price difference between them. So when you're looking at these two NASs, if you've spent a little bit of time going through the specifications, it suddenly becomes abundantly clear that their internal hardware specifications is frighteningly similar. And by that what I mean is, in the past we've always got used to the idea of the 5 and the 4 bay in the case of the 1019, the 1520 and the 1522 now, being very similar in hardware architecture to that of the 918, the 920 and now the 923. But the price now has got a little bit closer together and the hardware attributes have expanded to a point where the 1522, that under 230 or so quid difference, is actually a lot more acceptable for several reasons. Now, one of the main reasons for that kind of conflict for people is when people were looking at 5 bay before, it had certain hardware attributes that were just not available. It arrived with 4 LAN ports, as this does. It arrived with 8 gig in memory off the bat, and it's got the extra storage space and the expandability, something we'll touch on later on. And in previous iterations of Synology's product waves every 2 years or so in this series, the disparity between them was large enough that the larger Golf price point that existed then, about 2 to 250 nicker, when you looked at these two devices, it kind of made a lot more sense. But fast forward to now, and what you end up with, and we're going to go through the hardware architecture in just a moment between these two devices, is the new 4 bay is a lot more businessy. And therefore, instead of this this big difference between them being a little bit more justifiable and larger, somehow we've ended up in a case where the 920 is not only a little bit more business, but it's also a little closer in price. So it no longer, this gulf between them is in any way as tangible as it once was. And when it comes down to it, there's actually only about 3 differences between these two devices. I'm going to filter through even some real minutiae ones, but ultimately, when it comes between these two, what are you getting extra for that money, and do you need to spend it? And then on top of that, is it worth even going for this at all? Well, let's go through them. So first off, there is that price difference. Let's break it down real quick. When it comes to pricing, I've looked up pricing on box.co.uk. I've looked up for the US, I've looked at Newegg, and for Germany, I've used Amazon.de. And the prices there were £534.99, $649, and €699. And that's inclusive of local tax in those regions. The 1522, again, exactly the same 3 retailers, £680, $749, and €799 there. So again, about €100, $100 difference, and a little bit more there in the pounds. Things are creeping up here in the UK. Look at your Lecky bill. But when we look at the hardware architecture you're getting, there's only really, at least in terms of hardware architecture, just 2 very small differences. They've got the same CPU, the AMD R1600 embedded Ryzen processor there, a dual-core 2.6 GHz CPU that can be burst up to 3.1 GHz, no embedded graphics or integrated graphics, something that I know has ruffled the feathers of some of you. But the first big difference is to do with that memory. As I'm sure you're aware, the 93 arrives with 4 gig of memory, and the 1522 arrives with 8 gig of memory off the bat. Now, 4 gig don't sound like much, and if you do go to the shops, you nip out and you try and get yourself 4 gig of DDR4 SO-DIMM memory, honestly, you're looking at about 15 quid. I mean, 20 a push. It's not a lot of memory. However, you have to factor in something about these devices, and that is that they're using ECC memory, as mentioned, but they're also using Synology's own branded memory. And if you look at the price of a 4 gig stick of ECC Synology memory, that is a different kettle of goldfish. That is very much a big chunk of change. Synology do kind of charge a premium on their memory, and it is 3200 megahertz ECC memory. So again, that error correcting code, again, a little bit more businessy to avoid things like, you know, bit rot and inconsistencies on long-term cold storage. But that 4 gig of data already makes up a significant chunk of that price difference once you rattle through Amazon at your checkout basket. Now, another big difference between them in terms of hardware architecture is, of course, the storage. This is a 5 bay, this is a 4 bay. What does that really mean in the grand scheme of things? It's only 1 bay of storage, right? Well, yes and no. Because the 4 bays of storage on here, even if you populate them with Synology's own HAD5300 hard drives, you can, just on a pinch with lower form factor drives, fully saturate this device. We did it with 22 TB W-Red Pros, and we did it with their own 16 TB drives in a previous review. Now, we're able, as I say, to fully saturate 1000 megs there using 64 meg and I think 256 and maybe even 1 gig, only on read performance. So in write performance, we were more at between 600 and 700 megabytes per second there in a RAID 5 environment. Now, the extra bay of storage that this brings not only makes RAID 6 a little bit more palatable, but it also means that you don't have to fully populate the whole thing. When you get it on day dot, you can just go with 2 drives if you like, and then a year or 2 down the line, pop in another drive, year or 2 down the line, pop in another drive. These can mix and match thanks to Synology Hybrid RAID. But on top of that, it means that you can graduate your storage a lot more gradually, and that graduation in its lifespan is 1 bay bigger. So not only does that mean, thanks to RAID functionality, that the expandable size over time can be a great deal better, but on top of that, when you are reading and writing from multiple disks in a RAID array, particularly less so RAID 1, I would say, but certainly when it comes to RAID 5 and RAID 6, you are reading and writing from multiple disks at once. And although there is a slight impact on CPU with regards to creation of the parity data to maintain the redundancy, that is the safety net of a drive failure, in the case of this system, 5 drives being read from means hitting that 1000 megs that I'll discuss in a moment is a lot more attainable with less enterprise drives on this than it is on this. And if you do use enterprise drives, and again 7200, 256 meg cache, that sort of thing, larger capacities, at least over 10 to 12 TB, the result will be that you will hit 1000 megs over 1 gig file sizes. You'll also hit 1000 megs a great deal consistently on write, not just read in terms of sequential data there. Now, I mentioned that 1000 megs. The reason I bring that up is to do with the expandability. Both these devices can have a 10 GBE upgrade applied to the back. On the rear there, they both arrive with the option to add the E10G T1 Mini, not a catchy name, upgrade on there, the proprietary Synology module. Pop inside there, very easy, boom, 1000 megs added straight out there. But that's not the only thing. This system here has got 4 1GBE ports. Now, whatever your feelings, and again, let's not get into it about 1 gigabit Ethernet, I think we can all agree that 4 1GBE ports is better than 2. So that's another area where this system makes up for that price difference there. So the extra 2 Ethernet ports there mean not only things like link aggregation, or if you want to take advantage of that multi-lane stuff that's going on at the moment with SMB that's coming through on DS1522, and so there's a beta out there as well for SMB transfers. If in your Synology do go into that, and you'll find it down there, the beta SMB protocol. But when it comes to those 4 LAN ports, link aggregation, auto failover, having just more ways to create subgroups or sub-connections and, you know, kind of hard locking different IPs, you have more potential there than you do on this. And yes, you can both expand them with 10 GBE, but that's an optional extra. It's the idea that this system only has the 2 and this has 4. Now, when it comes to also thinking long-term, thinking upgradability, let's talk about storage again, because this system here can have 2 expansions added, 2 eSATA expansion devices, the DX517, about a 350 without your tax expansion device. It's a JBOD that adds 5 bays of storage, but this supports 2 of them, hence the 15 in the name. Another way in which scalability and long-term storage is just better on this device, because this is a 4-bay that can add one of those expansions. So you've got 9 bays of maximum storage. Again, shouldn't really kind of spread your storage over the 2 in a single storage pool. But if you did want to do that, which again, not recommended, that is a great deal more attainable on this, as well as using the expansion option to add the JBOD to work as a synchronized backup, although it's wire connected on this device over eSATA there. And again, 5 bays to a 5-bay expansion probably makes a lot more sense to some of you. But when it comes to these two devices, we have to talk about the giant M2 NVMe elephant in the room. Hello, and we just want to interrupt today's video to talk about Ask NAS Compares, the new community support forum, and give you some idea about how it can help you with your data storage needs, or maybe make a bit of scratch. And this is it. This is the community forum, Ask NAS Compares. It's a bit rough around the edges right now because it's early days, but with over 2,000 posts so far and 1,600 threads, it is getting some traction there. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and create an account. You can head to the top and search for any questions that are similar to what your requirements are and your support that you need, or you can just scroll down and I'll look at one of the posts or create your own. When you do, any one of the other users on the forum can answer your question along with me and Eddie. If they do have a question answered, you have the opportunity to add a coffee button via Ko-Fi so people can donate and give you tips based on your responses. You get to keep 100% of that. NAS Compares, me, Eddie, we don't care. Enjoy it for yourself. This is about a community forum. So if you need help with your data storage, or you've got a bit of spare time on your hands and a bit of knowledge and you want to help others, head over to Ask NAS Compares, where you can help the greater NAS community and we can all help each other out. And this is something I think a lot of people are going to get slowly but surely more pissed about if Synology doesn't address this a little bit more formally. And that is to do with, while I'm rotating this utterly wrong on the table, to do with those base slots, because both of these devices feature 2 M2 NVMe SSD bays. These allow you to install PCIe Gen 3 SSDs inside, and those SSDs can be used for caching. Well, I say that, it can be used for caching and storage pools on this. Now that's a big deal, because a number of you who are going out of your way to spend money on M2 NVMEs to go inside these devices, these are not cheap. These are around 3 to 4 times, depending on the PCIe gen and the capacity you go for, times the price of a traditional hard drive there. They also have performance levels in the thousands, unlike hard drives that will hit 230, 250 megs on a good day, unless you use certain file sizes. So these devices could fully saturate a 10 GBE connection, that 1000 megs number we keep talking about, on their own. No RAID, just right there. And you've got 2 of them that you can RAID together. So you can go for a RAID 1, boom, you've got yourself a mirrored fast storage area. Now, the fact that that is only, at the time of recording at least, available on just this NAS system is weird. And hopefully you're watching this video in the future, and in the future Synology have enabled this feature on a lot more devices. They have enabled that feature not just on the future devices, but they may have retroactively enabled it on devices like this, because I think a lot of us are just a bit dumbfounded, again, at least at the time of recording, because it may be corrected in the future, that this device here, with exactly the same CPU as this one, has that feature to use those as raw storage pools and caching, whereas this one doesn't. Now, we've dug in to this system at the back end in Putty to have a little look at the architecture, and it looks like, and again, thanks to the chap on Reddit that helped us out there, that this device, although it has PCIe Gen 3 x 4 lane for those M2s, it's capped currently at 1000 megs. Now, that throttling, there's a few theories, there's a few discussions with official that show that it may be to do with just maintaining system temp and general airflow and overheating to avoid throttling. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I'm not entirely certain, again, because that's no official statement there, so there's nothing really to back that up. But I think a decent heatsink on those should be sufficient, particularly with the 2 rear fans on it. But it still doesn't really make up for the fact that this has got those 2 M2 slots and they're not available for storage pools. Now, I accept if it wasn't available at launch, maybe the feature wasn't fully fleshed out in DSM 7.1, But the fact that DS7.1 now that this is released, and the fact they both run the exact same version of DSM, and they've got the same CPU inside, therefore PCIe chipset and lane architecture will be the same for the most part. The fact that has those two slots, but they can't be used for raw storage pools, I find frankly a little bit insulting. Now, it could be that the available lanes that CPU affords to this have been too spread out, because you do have to pair drives when you're laying out the chipset for a NAS, and drives that are in pairs take up lanes. So the fact this has got that fifth bay means it needs to take up another lane there. So because the pair grouping. So it could be that has forced the PCIe slots inside this system to be slightly restricted. They're still Gen 3, but it's whether they're Gen 3 times 2 or Gen 3 times 4 we'll have to dig into after this video. But regardless of whether that's true or not, this system is still having that capped 3:1, which may be lifted down the line, but it's still got storage pools. So that, to me, is not a good enough reason. Now, maybe it's a BIOS thing. Maybe it's something that can't be just flashed in a DSM update, and this is something Synology actually need to actively resolve themselves with a hard-coded firmware, motherboard firmware update, which is something you can't really do deep enough remotely with a DSM update. I'm not sure, but still, despite the fact that this system doesn't have M2 NVMe storage pool support and only for caching, I think that 100 to 130 nicka difference is enough for me to say that this is the better choice of the two. Because unless M2 NVMe's on this get unlocked out of that cap at 1000, yes, there's only an external cap of, because that 10GBU 1000, but internally could you be using that for VMs? Unless they unlock that M2 SSD capability on this, or you see a price drop, you start seeing it at 500 nicka here and thereabout, I personally would recommend the 1522 over it for two reasons. One, because I think Synology probably down the line will unlock those M2 NVMe's in this. It might take them a while. I don't think they can really justify it as an in-system exclusive only to this, given the similarity of the architecture. But even then, there are lots of users out there that are unofficially unlocking those with some relatively simple SSH commands. So therefore, for the extra bay of storage, the extra storage expandability, the extra LAN ports inside, and the simple fact that this is going to be expanded by 2 more expansions, for that price difference, it's just got more longevity in its future there. And even when it comes down to the software, there's almost no difference on DSM running on these devices. The only things I could find that were in any way I could personally validate, because there was some stuff on there about the licensing of EX format there on of exFAT. But even then, I think that was just a datasheet anomaly. There was stuff like maximum SMP concurrent transfers, 2000 capable at any given time versus 1000 on there, and max shared folder synchronization tasks, 32 versus 16 on this. But again, I think a lot of that's to do with that memory on day one and the amount you need there. And ultimately, for the price difference, I think the fact that you can use M2 NVMe storage port on this, as on this but not this, is not enough to place it in front of this, the older NAS that is already starting to see a few promos online thanks to that extra bit of time that's been spent in the market. And if you're going to be going into a Synology ecosystem anyway, then definitely go for this, because in terms of longevity and future-proofing, that relative small amount of money you're paying more up front gives you tremendous scalability down the line. And if you need further justification for that money, just remember the extra 4 gig of memory that's inside this device, that if you look at the pricing online, just costs that much more, and it's a single 8 gig module at that as well. So again, you don't have to worry about half moduling it as you go. It's a single 8 gig module in there with an extra slot free for when you want to stick in another one. But this has been comparing in a very casual way compared to my other comparisons, the 1522 Plus with the DS923 Plus. If there's anything you guys thought I missed, such as the PSU difference between them being around 30 watt, I think it's 20 watt actually, the fact the noise difference between them is like 0.2 of a dBA, If there's anything you think I've missed, do let me know in the comments. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. We'll have an article out on this very, very soon that goes into a little bit of detail. And if you've got any feedback of stuff that I've missed on these, I'll be sure to add it to that article. So if you've enjoyed this, click like. It really helps me out to understand what I'm doing right and wrong, ever since YouTube basically knackered the dislike button. If you want to learn more about any of these devices or NAS in general, click subscribe. If you need help or advice with your data storage setup, use the free advice section over on NAS Compares or the free community forum over there, over on Ask NAS Compares, manned by me and Eddie, who does a lot more work on there than me, by the way, and other NAS users. And finally, if this video has genuinely helped you choose the right NAS for you, and if you're going to shop from Amazon anyway, use the links in the description. Using them will cost you nothing extra, and anything, and I mean anything you buy after using that link, will result in a kickback from Amazon coming to here on the channel, because we're Amazon associates, and therefore that little kickback goes straight back in to help us do what we do. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.